Now we are going to study the political liberalism. This is a new way of thinking, the liberalism. It's an ideology, a new way. And this one is based, of course, in freedom. Liberalism and freedom are always the same. So we will see what is this and its influence in economy and in politics and, of course, in society. First point is the political liberalism, how this idea of freedom can make an influence, have an influence on politics. And for that it's very, very important the British thinker John Locke. Locke said he had the idea that the state, actually what we call the state, is a contract. It's a social contract. And in this social contract there are two parts. One is the ones who rule, and the ones who are ruled. That means the rulers and the ruled. The rulers, of course, usually it is the king, the head of the state, and the ruled are rest of population. But it must be a contract. Every part must do their job. For example, if the king is not a good king, according to Locke's ideas, the king can be removed because he is not a very good king. So he is not making his part of their accord, their agreement. It was one interesting idea, and it's changing everything, because according to the old regime, the king, for example, is king because God decided he was a king. It's a divine right. It's a right that is given by God. And now Locke is telling, but this right can be removed, and not removed by God, removed by people, if the contract is not correctly carried on. So different thinkers, especially in France, they started thinking and making suggestions and making people think about it. For example, one of the most important ones was Montesquieu. We know this one. He wrote a book called The Spirit of Law, and this one, he said, the powers should be separated. The most important powers of the state, that means the legislative, to make laws, the executive, to execute these laws, to carry out these laws, and the judicial power to decide what is fair and what is unfair. These three powers should be separated. In the old regime, the kings, usually they were absolute kings, they had the three powers together. So they decided absolutely everything. They decided laws, they decided how to execute these laws, and they decided if what they did was okay or it wasn't. So according to Montesquieu, that should be separated. So a different branch, different group of people, judges, should say if things are fair or unfair. Another branch should be the executive power, the head of the government. That, for example, could be the king. And another different branch should be the legislative power, people who are going to write laws. This is another interesting idea, another enlightened idea. Another one very important thinker was Voltaire, François-Marie Arouet, and he criticized the fanatism and he criticized the intolerance. For him, society should tolerate different ideas, different ways of thinking, and of course, different religions, different beliefs. Voltaire believed in powerful kings, so he believed in an absolute monarch, an absolute king. But he thought at the same time people should have individual rights, rights that the king cannot remove. And that's very, very interesting, because he's not opposing the absolute monarchy, but actually he's not giving this absolute power to the king, because he is removing certain powers, the rights, the individual rights from people. And another important French thinker was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This one is using this Locke's idea about the social contract, and he wrote a book called The Social Contract, explaining that sovereignty, the property of the country, actually shouldn't be in the hands of the king, but in the hands of people. So the sovereignty should be national, popular sovereignty, not the king's sovereignty. Although he agreed there should be a king as governor, as ruler, but actually controlled under the orders, the commands from people. So actually the sovereignty, the real owners of the country should be people. These three ideas, you see, separation of powers, the tolerance, this popular sovereignty, for us today they are very, very usual. For us this is the normal, of course, This is the only fair thing. But it wasn't in Europe, and it wasn't in Spain, and it was only 200 years ago. That wasn't so usual. These people were the people who started making rest of the people think, let's change things, let's change this way of working. And this is how Europe is nowadays. But these ideas, these enlightened ideas, are not the most usual in the world nowadays. So there are a lot of countries, actually almost most of the countries, they don't have these ideas. They don't believe in separation of powers. They don't think of this social contract, rulers and ruled. But in Europe, we think nowadays this is the best way, and for us it's completely usual.